Thank you so much. We have actually a particular division of labor, and I guess Topi is still on backstage, but he will appear. And thank you for Ulrika for the excellent introduction to the theme of this year's Aboagora. And our title and this presentation is titled Ach, bitter fate, ach, wicked, cruel fate, expressions of destiny and free will. And this particular phrase comes from a work of opera. They are the words of Pastore, the shepherd, in the key work of operatic history, Claudio Monteverdi's L'Orfeo. Monteverdi's work was the late Renaissance or early Baroque, favola in musica, or opera. It was premiered during the carnival season in Mantova in 1607. It was not the first opera, but it proved to be the most popular of all early works. Its libretto was penned by Alessandro Striggio the Younger, whose father was also a composer. Striggio based his text on the Greek legend of Orpheus, quite much on the basis of Ovid's work Metamorphosis. It tells the story of the famous poet and musician who descends to the underworld and attempts to bring his dead bride Eurydice back to the living world, but in vain, as we know. At the turn of the 16th and 17th centuries, the story of Orpheus and Eurydice attracted other composers too. L'Orfeo was preceded by Jacopo Peri's Eurydice in 1600 and Giulio Caccini's Eurydice in 1602. Later, the travels of Orpheus in the kingdom of the death have appealed, for example, such composers as Christoph Willibald Gluck and Jacques Offenbach, and such filmmakers as Marcel Camus and Jean Cocteau. Orpheus was a character in ancient Greek mythology. The first mentions of his name date back to the 6th century BC, and he's also noted by Homer and Hesiod. Orpheus was characterized as the father of songs and identified as a son of the Thracian king Oeagrus and the muse Calliope. Orpheus had a particular ability to charm birds, fishes, and other wild animals with his songs, and he could even divert the course of rivers and get the mountains to dance. Can you imagine that kind of a singing ability? That's fantastic. In the ancient world, there was also a cult around him called Orphism, which promised advantages in the afterlife. Later, he has become an iconic figure for an inspired singer and a poet. There are many stories of Orpheus, but the most famous one tells about his journey into the underworld, how he went to look for his dead wife, how sweetly he sang to Hades and Persephone, and how he got them crying. Finally, he got Eurydice with him, but he was advised not to look behind. In his anxiety, however, he could not avoid turning to look at her, and she vanished forever. There were also many negative descriptions of Orpheus and his hubris in the ancient Greece, telling that he mocked the gods and was punished because of this. In some stories, Orpheus was killed by angry women who tore apart his head. On the one hand, Orpheus had the ability to sing, to change people's minds, and thus to influence others' destinies. On the other hand, he couldn't escape his own fate and had a very sad ending, as we can see from this painting by Gustave Moreau, where you can see actually his head on his instrument in this image. Let us now listen how Claudio Monteverdi described the exceptional talents of Orfeo and his singing. We will now hear two arias from l'Orfeo, Rosa del Ciel, where Orfeo praises the sun and expresses how happy and fortunate lover he is. And Vi ricorda o Boscombrosi, where Orfeo continues his rejoice of love, and I would like to invite Topi Lehtipuu and Eero Palviainen to first.
Now, for us, living artists at the year 2016, it's very interesting to approach the myth of Orpheus, and especially to play a piece or perform pieces which were composed more or less 400 years ago. What does it speak to us? If we have a piece which starts with a minor key, la la la, rosa del cielo, vita del mondo. What did it mean in year 1600 to the people who heard this kind of notes? And what does it mean to you? Because it's so close to rosa del cielo, vita del mondo, some kind of ornaments which lead you to somewhere totally elsewhere. Or even more Arabic, more jazz. We have different meanings for these things nowadays. But we try to be very purist and approach that minor tone from Claudio's point of view. And let's see what kind of emotions it evokes in you people from 2016.
Dagli stellanti giri, dimmi, vedesti mai di me più lieto e fortunato amante? Fu ben felice il giorno che briati vidi, e più felice l'ora che per te al mio sospirar tu sospirasti. Felicissimo il punto che a Candiano pegno di pura fe da me porgesti, se tanti cuori avessi quanto tocca il cielo eterno e quante chiome a questi culli al So per te belle Euridice, so per te belle Euridice, me ne dico il mio tormento, dove tuo è più contento, dove mal è più felice. So per te belle Euridice, so per te belle Euridice.
Well, that's how Orfeo must have sounded. Well, regrettably, I have to stick into my fate and continue with my paper, although I would like to break the convention and ask him back again. But what we heard actually were the two arias, central arias from l'Orfeo. And here, Orfeo has nothing to fear, really, and he is completely unaware of the future that is lurking behind the curtain. He does not even seem to be a toy of fate in any way. As an audience, we know that this is only an illusion. And perhaps this very fact adds a bit of sadness into these bright images, especially in the first aria, Rosa del Ciel, which starts with a minor key. There's a particular twist in that aria. Well, in Greek mythology, fate was often portrayed in the form of three ladies, the Moirae, or in English, the Fates. These three women, in their white robes, were incarnations of destiny. Their names were Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos. They had a particular division of labor, so they were working women as well as the ancient Norns. Clotho was spinning the thread of life. The Lachesis measured its length, and Atropos cut it at the point of dying. The idea of the thread of life, and that life is essentially fragile, like a thread, is thousands of years old. People cannot foresee their moment of dying, which is ultimately at the hands of Atropos. This applies to Orpheus, or Orfeo as well. In praising the rosy color of the sky and the bright light of the sun, he had no idea of the fragility of his own life. This painting from the 16th century tells that the three fates became a part of European cultural memory for centuries, or actually thousands of years. And the ancient culture has lived through these centuries. The three fates were known also in the Norse mythology, as we heard today, as the three Norns, Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld, who sit at the foot of the tree of the world. Richard Wagner used these Norns in the beginning of his music drama Götterdämmerung, but in his vision, the world is not as it used to be, and the threads appear to be so messy that the Norns cannot see the future at all. The power of ancient knowledge was drying out, and you can also imagine it from this image from the 2010 Götterdämmerung in Bayreuth. As you all know, this year's Aboagora draws on the idea of fate, or merely provokes us to question the cultural ramifications of the notion of fate. Often fate is associated with a mythological or religious view of the world. It refers to a predetermined course of events or a fixed order of things produced by a divine will or an impersonal force. We might consider fate as a concept that belongs to the past, but how often do we actually raise our hands and seem to think that what is happening is predetermined course of events, if not designed by a divine force, at least set by someone else that has more power than we do here on the grassroots level. Often, fate and destiny are used synonymously, but it seems that the question of destiny includes more individual involvement than fate. We cannot take our fate into our hands, but we can change our destinies. Fate seems to be an overarching concept that covers the past, the present, and the future. It is inescapable, unavoidable, irreversible. Still, there was a certain whimsical aspect in how events worked themselves out. The individual could never be sure of the secret plan that there was behind the obvious world. The ancient Romans had a goddess of fortune, Fortuna, who turned blindly her wheel and brought either good or bad luck. The question of fate and destiny addresses the fundamental uncertainty of life. But it is also closely linked with the problem of free will, as we already heard in Ulrika's presentation. It is intriguing to note, at least for me as a historian, that in the cradle of democracy, in the 5th century Athens BC, the tension between fate and free will was continuously negotiated in the tragedies of Aeschylus, Euripides, and Sophocles. The most famous example of this is the tragedy Oedipus the King, or Oedipus Rex in Latin, by Sophocles. It tells the story of Oedipus, who becomes the king of Thebes, and who, without knowing, fulfills a prophecy. He kills his father, Laius, and marries his mother, Jocasta. Oedipus is ignorant of his past and pursues for knowledge of his identity with disastrous results. When striving for free will and his own choices, he ends up in realizing his inevitable fate. In the end, Oedipus sees the real state of affairs, but only after having become blind. On the one hand, Oedipus seems to be a puppet at the mercy of gods, but on the other hand, he has also made individual decisions that lead to tragic flaws. Often tragedy is connected with a pessimistic vision of the world. Death seems to dominate our birth, and the fist of fate seems inescapable. It is important, however, to remember that our view on the ancient Greece is very much based on the fragmented sources we have at our hands, and furthermore, that when discussing tragedies, it is always a question of fiction. The most influential account on tragedy is Aristotle's Poetics. Aristotle refers to the inevitability of events and how the audience feels emotions of fear and pity in watching the downfall of the protagonist. What is interesting, however, is that Aristotle points out the crucial position of the poet in creating all this, although this happens passingly in the book. Aristotle writes how the persons are destined by the poet for good or bad fortune. Aristotle does not refer to Orpheus, but in his view, too, the poet has the power of changing the world. If there are only limited possibilities for individual choices in the fictional world, there will be plenty of possibilities for expressions of free will on the meta level since the poet rules everything. In the end, tragedy is a poet's creation. Since this is the case, we might ask, why doesn't the world of states offer more space for expressions of free will? Well, it does. What is the appeal of fatalistic inevitability of the causes of action? I return to this issue after a while. Anyway, it is obvious that Greek tragedy has had a deep impact on both opera and theatre. In the 17th and 18th centuries, operas drew on classical themes, which are already exemplified by Claudio Monteverdi and many of his contemporaries. The first operas featured mythological stories such as Orpheus and Eurydice, but tragic qualities were often pushed aside. These expensive spectacles were often performed for dynastic marriages and other high celebrations, and therefore the stories were changed to have a happy ending. Monteverdi's L'Orfeo is a good example, although the poet Alessandro Striggio has given a different destiny for Orfeo and for Eurydice. There is clearly a gendered undertone in this decision. In the fourth act of the opera, Eurydice just fades away, exactly as the legend says, but Orfeo avoids his sad ending. In the fifth and the final act, Apollo descends from the heavens, invites Orfeo to leave the world and join Eurydice in the upper spheres. This is an offer that Orfeo cannot resist. And thus the opera ends with happy feelings. So that's how Monteverdi solved the tragic problem in the opera. Over a century later, the story of Orpheus and Eurydice was still raw material for opera. In the early 1760s, Christoph Willibald Gluck composed his version of the legend on the basis of the Italian libretto by Ranieri de Calzabigi. Gluck's work has been praised as a reform opera where he looked for simplicity in both music and drama. The result, Orfeo et Eurydice, was premiered in Vienna in 1762. Later, Gluck made also a French version in 1774. Gluck himself defined his composition as a tragic piece, but in the manner of Monteverdi, it too had a positive turn in the end. In Gluck's interpretation, Eurydice is again in the underworld where Orfeo has to go, and again Orfeo is advised not to look at her partner. Eurydice takes this to be a sign that he no longer loves her and refuses to continue, concluding that death would be preferable. Unable to take any more, Orfeo turns and looks at Eurydice, and she dies. The tragic disaster happens again. Orfeo is already willing to kill himself to be able to return to his beloved. But suddenly Amore appears and solves the problem in the end of the opera. In contrast to Monteverdi, the lovers do not meet in the afterlife, but here in the mortal world, since Amore returns Eurydice to life and the lovers are united. After this, all sing in praise of Amore. Gluck's opera was performed in Paris in 1774, 15 years before the Great Revolution. Often the break caused by the revolution is regarded as an essential turn into our modern world. In 1789, the Declaration of Human Rights stated in its first article that men are born and remain free and equal in rights. Although the Western world was set on a trajectory of change through industrialization, through the abolishing of monarchy, and through the establishment of civil society, the change was and has been slow. There were many boundaries between people in the 19th century, between social, religious, and ethnic groups, and between genders. Even if we didn't approve the idea of fate as an overarching, invisible force above all this, it is important to ask, how were individual lives predetermined by social class, gender, religion, and ethnicity? And if they were predetermined, why couldn't this be viewed in terms of fate? In 19th century opera and theatre, the question of fate is very strongly present, actually amazingly strongly present, perhaps even more so than in the previous century. Perhaps the most dramatic opera on the power of the fate was Giuseppe Verdi's La Forza del Destino, that was premiered in St. Petersburg in 1862. In this work, everything leads in an inevitable catastrophe, and now not even prayer and monastic seclusion can save the characters of the opera from the cruel and irrational hand of fate. When the opera was staged in Milan a couple of years later, Verdi was forced to change the ending of the story. In the original version, the protagonist, Don Alvaro, kills himself, but in the Milan version, he had to fall to his knees and pray for reconciliation with God. Giuseppe Verdi and his librettist Francesco Maria Piave had to negotiate on how the story could be told for the Italian audience. But as said, the original work was a dark view on the human condition. It seems that particularly the 19th century melodrama drew on the idea of fate in trying to deal with the existing social and political circumstances. By exaggerating class differences, it made the differences visible, which in turn had a liberating effect on the audience. To return to the Aristotelian views, the poet has the power to determine destinies, but sometimes it's more effective to exaggerate the inevitability of circumstances to make the audience notice the conditions. By these means, the emphasis on fate might strengthen its opposite, the fact that everything is not determined by fate. Well, the idea of fate may also appear in a symbolic manner. In 19th century music and poetry, there are numerous descriptions of unhappy, unfulfilled love affairs, where the lover has to curse the misfortunes again and again. As we know, the culture of love, or merely the cult of love, had a strong position in the 19th century. Individual right for emotional expression was foregrounded, but as has been noted, the question of love and marriage were not a playground for individual choices or free will at the time. Marriages were still often bargains or agreements between families, especially among the bourgeoisie. One of the most famous poets of the century was Heinrich Heine. He was a master of satirical wit and irony, but he wrote also impressive poems on love. His most well-known collection was published in 1827 under the title Buch der Lieder, and many composers such as Felix Mendelssohn, Franz Schubert, and Robert Schumann used these texts in their songs. Robert Schumann's song cycle Dichterliebe, A Poet's Love from 1840, is entirely based on Heine's verses. Schumann's cycle draws on Lyrisches Intermezzo that includes a prologue and 65 poems. Heine's original work centers a sorrowful knight who sits in the house all day, but by night he is visited by his fairy bride, who dances with him until daylight. When the sun rises, he is alone again in his poet's room, Poetens Stübchen. In Schumann's interpretation, this frame story is missing, but the selection of 16 songs portrays a work in its own right, full of flowers and fairies, but also full of emotions, excitement and despair. Already in Heine's original verses, the question of fate played an important role as an invisible force that at the daylight always separated the lovers. In Schumann's cycle, the element of fate is still there. Well, we will now hear the song number 7 from Robert Schumann's Dichterliebe, titled Ich grolle nicht. This is a very short song that is based on contradiction and self-denial. The male protagonist sings that he does not complain and bears no grudge, even though his heart is breaking. And still the song is nothing else than a complaint. And let's listen to that. Let's see what happens.
I should not speak, but I have to, because I have something on my heart. Now, this man, Hannu Salmi, Renaissance man, gives us surprises every day. He also plays the piano.
I try to break from my faith. I should follow my fate. That was pretty hard. But anyway, this was Robert Schumann's Ich grolle nicht, at least from the part of the singer. It was a very short song, as you heard, only about 1 minute. I often hope it would be longer, but not probably this time. It is actually amazing how condensed this little song is. As already said, the whole song is based on a contradiction. The protagonist argues that he does not bear any grudge, but soon it is obvious that what he thinks is quite the opposite. The song is like a microscopic tragedy where the lover has not got any response. As the words suggest, he has always thought like this: there falls no light into your heart's night that I have known for a long time. So he has known that for a long time already. In that sense, the result is inevitable, because he foresaw that already. There is no light in the heart's night. Ich grolle nicht is an exceptional song, But on the other hand, it is one of the many love songs where the final satisfaction will never be realized. The bottomless yearning for love became a literary convention. Well, I would like to continue on the idea of literary conventions and return to Aristotle's Poetics and his thought that it's the poet that ultimately decides on the destinies of the dramatic personae. From this perspective, fate is not only designed by the poet, but it always involves literary conventions that might move from one text to another. Greek tragedies had similar characteristics, similar features in their plots, with catastrophes in the end. We tend to think that fate is a reference to an invisible power or agency, but it can also be interpreted as a narrative pattern that forces stories to take particular predetermined trajectories. Fate is a narrative convention that can be broken, and in particular cases has to be broken. When the poet writes the destinies of his or her characters, isn't it always the question of how the poet defines the boundaries of what is possible and what is not possible? This reminds me of the notion of culture. The Italian historian Carlo Ginzburg discusses this in his classic work, The Cheese and the Worms, the cosmos of a 16th century Miller. Ginzburg calls culture an invisible cage that surrounds people. For Ginzburg, culture provides people with a horizon of latent possibilities, a flexible and invisible cage within which people can exercise their own conditional liberty. Every person is surrounded by a number of hidden possibilities that can be achieved. They exist on the horizon in such a way that they can be attained. Similarly, some possibilities lie on the other side of the horizon and cannot be perceived. I would like to argue that in writing his or her work, the poet participates in writing out these boundaries of culture by assessing what is possible for the characters of the play and what is not possible. Indeed, how often are the characters of an opera or a theatrical piece portrayed as living in an invisible cage where they can only exercise their conditional liberty? Sadly, when the poet finally breaks the convention, like in La Forza del Destino, the result brings up discussion, even moral concern, and they have to withdraw the idea of breaking the convention. This shows, of course, that the arts and their representations of fate and free will are not reflections of the world outside, but have an impact on how we conceive the world and how we live in it. The art is an active proponent, an agent of culture. Since the breaking of convention is so essential, you might even ask, why to listen so long this kind of an academic presentation? And that's a good question.
As I am now, I am no wife for you.
But I have it in me to become a different man.
Perhaps if your doll is taken away from you.
But to part. Nora, I cannot understand all that.
That makes it all the more certain that it must be done.
Nora, not now. Please wait until tomorrow.
I cannot spend the night in a strange man's room.
But can't we live here like a brother and sister?
You know very well that would not last long. Goodbye, Torvald. I won't see the little ones. I know they are in better hands than mine. As I am now, I am no use to them.
But someday, maybe someday.
How can I tell? I have no idea what is going to become of me.
But you are my wife. Whatever becomes to you, you are my wife.
Listen, Torvald! I have heard that when a wife deserts her husband's house, as I am doing now, he is legally freed from all obligations towards her. In any case, I set you free from all your obligations. You are not to feel yourself bound in the slightest way, any more than I shall. There must be perfect freedom on both sides. See? Here is your ring back.
That too?
That too.
Here is mine.
That's right. Now it's all over. I have put the keys here. The maids know all about everything in the house, better than I do. Tomorrow, after I have left her, Christine will come here and pack up my own things that I brought with me from home. I will have them sent after me.
All over. All over. Nora, shall you never think me again?
I know I shall often think of you, and the children, and this house.
May I write to you, Nora?
No. Never. You must not do that.
But at least let me send you something.
Nothing! Nothing.
Let me at least help you if you are in want.
No, I can receive nothing from a stranger.
Nora, can I never be anything more than a stranger to you?
Oh, Torvald. The most wonderful thing of all would have to happen.
Tell me what that would be.
Both you and I would have to be so changed that... Oh, Torvald, I don't believe any longer in wonderful things happening.
But I believe in all that. But what do you mean? Tell me...
that
so
our
change-
life together would be a real wedlock. Goodbye.
Nora! Nora! Empty. She's gone. The most wonderful things of all. Nora! Nora!
Well, thank you so much for our special guest, Sara Melleri. I hope you can come here. Thank you so much for Sara and Topi for this this excellent performance of the last scene of a play that you probably knew. It was from Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House, Et Dykkehem, a three-act play that was premiered at the Royal Theatre of Copenhagen in 1879. Ibsen's play can be actually paralleled to Minna Kant's Sylvie in Finland. Both were significant for their critical attitude toward 19th century marriage norms, to marriage as an institution, and to women's rights. Ibsen's play aroused great controversy at the time, as it concludes with the protagonist Nora leaving her husband and children because she wants to discover herself. Actually, Ibsen commented on this in his writing Notes on a Modern Tragedy. Ibsen wrote of having been inspired by the belief that the woman cannot be herself in modern society, since it is an exclusively male society with laws made by men and with prosecutors and judges who assess feminine conduct from a masculine standpoint. These were the words by Ibsen. What Ibsen did in his play was the crucial break in the convention of how theatrical tragedies should end. Interestingly, also, A Doll's House got an alternative ending. Sad to say. Ibsen's German agent expressed his worries that the original ending would not play well in German theaters. And Ibsen was forced to write a new ending for the German premiere. In this scene, Nora does not leave. After having argued with Torvald, she is led to her children. She collapses after seeing them, and the curtain falls down. Well, Ibsen himself characterized this change as a barbaric outrage. And soon the original version was premiered in Germany as well, which perhaps shows how the times were also changing. And there was a place for a more subversive, liberating ending that appreciates Nora's right to decide on her own life. What I want to stress is that the question of fate and free will is an essential issue for all of us, for a historian like me, who interprets the past, for a poet who creates the boundaries of what is possible and what is not, and for the audience who negotiates its own freedom of action. Well, we started this presentation with Claudio Monteverdi's L'Orfeo, which ends with the apotheosis of Orfeo and Eurydice. But very much so, the legend has been viewed and interpreted from the perspective of Orfeo. How about Eurydice, who always has to die because Orfeo cannot resist watching her? Well, if we look carefully into the past, we can find other kinds of stories that allow us to consider, if not Eurydice's, at least more generally, women's position at the time. Ancient literature includes many dramas that seem to precede Ibsen's Doll's House. There are strong women characters that have inspired later dramatists and opera composers. One of them is Iphigenia. Well, this beautiful image is actually from the 19th century, because at that time there was a Liebig meat extract company who always printed very beautiful images to accompany the meat extract. And that's from a series on Greek tragedies. They had also a Wagner series. Well, in the Greek mythology, Iphigenia was the daughter of King Agamemnon and Queen Clytemnestra. As the story goes, after offending Artemis, Agamemnon was commanded to kill Iphigenia as a sacrifice to allow his ships to sail to Troy. So the father was commanded to kill her daughter. In some versions, Iphigenia is sacrificed at Aulis, but in others she is rescued by Artemis, whose feelings in the end have led Iphigenia to her difficult position. In the drama by Euripides, Iphigenia in Tauris, Iphigenia is saved. She goes to the Taurians and meets her brother Orestes. Well, since we have such wonderful actors here today, let's follow a short passage from Euripides' drama Iphigenia in Tauris, which reveals how Iphigenia herself influences her destiny and is not a passive servant of her fate. In an impressive scene, Iphigenia is planning to escape together with Orestes and Pylades, but they must keep their plan as secret as possible. The chorus of the play consists of Greek slave women. Orestes asks Iphigenia to persuade the slave women to keep the secret and suggests also that Iphigenia should draw on the solidarity of women. She does so and even kneels in front of the leader of the chorus.
Good. It needs only that these women aid our secret. Do thou speak with them and find words of persuasion. Power is in the mind of women to wake pity. For the rest, God knoweth. May it all end for the best.
O women, you, my comrades, in your eyes I look to read my fate. In you it lies, that either I find peace or be cast down to nothing, robbed forever of mine own. Brother and home and sister pricelessly beloved. Are we not women, you and I? A broken race, to one another true, and strong in our shared secrets. Help me through the strait. Keep hid the secret of our flight, and share our peril. Honor shineth bright on her whose lips are steadfast. Heaven above, 3 souls, but one in fortune, one in love. Thou seest us go. Is it to death or home? If home, then surely there shall come part of our joy to thee. I swear to aid thee also home. I make my prayer by that right hand to thee, by that dear cheek, by thy knees, by all that is not here of things beloved, by mother, father, child. Thou hadst a child. How say ye? Have ye smiled or turned from me? For if ye turn away, I and my brother are lost things this day.
Thank you so much. That's an impressive scene in the play. Euripides is famous for his female characters. Let us only think of such dramatic figures as Medea and Electra. But Iphigenia is not an exception. She has a nostalgia for her lost homeland, but she's also proud and openly dislikes her countrymen for what they have done for her. Iphigenia is daring, but she's also a quick thinker who can help the whole bunch to escape. And in this scene, she really persuaded the Greek slave women to help her in this task. Already in the 5th century BC, Euripides was breaking conventions by giving space for Iphigenia. but also in another sense. The tragedy is not actually so tragic, and there's no major catastrophe in the end. Merely, there are tragic events that precede the play, and the end result is more like a romantic melodrama. Iphigenia is in many ways independent, but finally, she cannot dictate her own future. In the last sequence of the drama, Athena appears, the goddess Athena appears, and makes Iphigenia a priestess at the sacred terraces of Brauron. Athena declares, both gods and mortals must obey necessity. Here, a cultural boundary becomes visible, something that even Iphigenia cannot transgress. Now, we have gone through the endings of actually quite many works of art today, but at least the endings of two plays, Iphigenia in Tauris and A Doll's House, which were born in completely different historical settings over 2,000 years away from each other. But still we are puzzled by the ways in which they express the questions of faith and free will, and how in the end the poets participate in imagining what is possible for the contemporaries and what is not. As an epilogue, let us return to Claudio Monteverdi and his L'Orfeo. The opera as we know it concludes with the elevation of Orfeo into the heavens, where he can join Eurydice. The story ends with the closure. Monteverdi's opera was born in the 17th century at the time of the emergence of modern Europe. It is interesting to note that also this work had an alternative ending, which is amazing. How many alternative endings can there be? The librettist Alessandro Striggio wrote originally a completely different ending for the work, where Apollo never arrives. So there is no intervention of the gods in the end. Instead, a group of bacchantes, wild angry women, enter the scene and steal the show. In this version, Orfeo would have left the scene without any particular drama. His destiny would remain uncertain. Well, I can imagine why this version was not produced for the carnival in Mantova. But in that idea, his destiny would be open. This version of the libretto was never realized, but still it seems to capture something essential of the human condition. Our future is fundamentally insecure, and we cannot know what will be ahead. Orfeo does not know. He does not know. He does not even have the firmness of the faith as an overarching linkage between the past, the present, and the future. So he has somehow lost also the security that comes with the idea of faith. Well, this presentation has to conclude, and we will conclude now with Monteverdi's music that expressed the uncertainty about the future. Topi Lehtipuu and Eero Palviainen will perform one of the key scenes of Monteverdi's L'Orfeo, the aria Tu sei morta. It is actually preceded by the shouts of the shepherd, which is also sung by Topi. The particular shouts that we have used as the motto of this show, a bitter fate, ach wicked and cruel destiny.
Ai caso acerbo, ai fate io respiro. Tu sei la mia partita, sei la mia partita per mai più non tornare, ed io rimango. No, no, che sei verus alcuna cosa no, n'andrò sicuro più profondi abissi. Intenerito il cor del re dell'ombre, eco tarocchi la rive delle stelle, o se ciò negherà mien più destino, rimarrò teco in compagnia di morte. Addio terra, addio cielo, e sole, addio.
Actually, because Topi has talked so few words today, could you comment, because you have been in many stage productions of Orfeo, how the directors actually treat these kinds of dramatic elements? I know that they have the right to do it otherwise.
I've done 3 different productions of Orfeo. One of the most interesting was choreographer from America called Trisha Brown, who treated the piece as a canvas of dance and modern choreography. Another production which strikes my mind is Barry Koski's. He's a stage director. Barry Koski, his stage direction. And I think not to go into detail to these versions, but I think this Monteverdian thought about how the text kind of comes first and the music then. Of course, they create a combination. It allows the directors to approach the piece from very, very many angles, which are all very, most often they are very satisfying. So I remember having sung the Apollo's aria, for example, in the Trisha Brown version. No, that was the Barry Koski version, being a kind of a modern E.T. with a modified body, with a longer kind of an alien head and long fingers. And he's the guy who brought the light. There was no other light on scene than the light which I had in my hand. So the kind of the imagery of Apollo could be turned to a totally different world of associations and still be totally adequate in the world of dramaturgy. So there is a space in this myth for the director's follies.
We have other questions. If not, maybe I can allow myself a question then. I was very fascinated to see how or actually, Hannu, you pointed out that the arts have not just been reflections of ideas of fate, but actually have been proponents also of it. And you took us in history all the way to the 19th century, but I would just invite you to take this all the way up until today and ask you, do you see this kind of, I mean, think about contemporary art or even popular culture, do you see there also, I mean, at least they will give voice maybe to ideas of fate and destiny, but do they also shape them?
Well, that's actually a very difficult question, because we might actually view that from the point of view of mainstream culture, for example. I would actually read rather critically those kinds of like conditions that make people behave in a particular way in a drama. But of course, they're also liberating stories. So, but still, I think there are pretty strong narrative patterns that I often wonder why do they end in a way that they do. But it's very difficult actually to bring it to the contemporary world in a way. I know that there are people who know this better could actually comment on this, but of course I think there's a certain multitude of different narratives nowadays. Yeah.
Yes, I would like to point to this matter of embodiment, and both in the dialogues from plays and which Topi and Sarah were doing, which were sort of speaking through body language very much, but also in the songs. I was very impressed by the way you were bringing not only by voice but also by the whole being, like the essence of the emotion of the songs. Thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed your songs, but I couldn't see any science in the presentation.
That's a good point.
Yes, but your imagination can find parallels between plays and science. For instance, in quantum mechanics, all possibilities are present until we look at reality, and then one possibility realizes. And in a way, the author of a play has all the possibilities present, and then he chooses one. The difference between our view of reality according to science and reality according to the playwriter is that we cannot choose what the quantum particle chooses to realize us, but the playwright can choose. So he is in a way God. What do you say about that?
Well, actually, Aristotle would actually think probably in the same way, that the poet has the power to do almost everything there. But of course, there's always the question of credibility. Where comes the limit that it actually meets the audience? What's the limit? I have actually thought about the question of possible and the real lately quite much. It's also the question of how we conceive the possibilities. Actually, we often tend to think of that there is a set of possible things, and I might actually argue that it's very often so that it's something completely different. Probably through improvisation, we might actually find ways of doing really unexpected things, and probably that would be one way of elaborating things. Actually, to start with certain parameters and then start improvising and see how it goes. Because often I think that these kinds of, if there's a set of possibilities, it's already rather limited, I think. But it might be interesting actually, if I'm, as a historian, actually to see different kinds of versions of works and how they work and under which conditions particular decisions have been made. Do you want to comment on this topic?
First of all, thank you both. And while Professor Hannu was talking, I actually started thinking about a movie which was written and directed by Woody Allen in 1996. And it's named Deconstructing Harry. So as you probably know, Woody Allen usually puts things in a very funny way. But he actually deals with pretty serious questions such as death and fate and destiny. So in this movie, there is a story it is consisted of many different stories. So in one of them, there is a guy who borrows a flat from a friend in order to have a one-night stand. So there he is with a girl, and someone knocks at the door. So the guy opens, it's a typical Woody Allen scene, and there is the death standing and saying, okay, I came to pick you up. It's about time. And then the guy says, no, but this is not my flat. Look at the door, like look at the writing. I just borrowed the flat. Here is my girlfriend. No. So death says, no. Like, I came to pick you up. It's about time. So my question is there such a thing as wrong faith? As there are alternative endings there. So from what you know or you are familiar with, is there something that we can get as a sort of wrong faith? Something that we got wrongly? Thanks.
By accident.
Or you should start watching Woody Allen movies and then we can talk next year.
Yeah, if I were Woody Allen, I would think that the life is an accident, and that's a natural conclusion. Natural conclusion to that. I don't know. If I go to the ancient idea, I think there couldn't be a thing like a wrong fate or fate by accident. But there were fatal flaws that we people make, and somehow notice that there is a master plan where this all leads. So I think probably it might be like the difference between fate and destiny somehow. But I wouldn't see in that idea. But in a Woody Allen-esque world, that of course would work.
I would like to thank all of you for the wonderful beginning of these 3 days, and also comment on what I was associating to when I listened to Ulrika Wolf-Knuts and to you, Hannu Salmi, was the way you culturally and historically talked about faith. And you even said, I think, that something about the horizon and how the poet can make the limits more clear to the audience, what is possible, what is not. And to me, there was somehow a real connection to deep science. That is the science of sciences, philosophy. There was with Aristotle, of course, but also modern phenomenological approach. It is how we see the world. Perhaps it's our destiny, our fate, but it's all this history that we have with us that make us see something, notice something, and we have our preconceptions like a special horizon. What limits us as the cage, but also makes it possible for us to act, because otherwise we would be in a chaos. So I thought that this phenomenological deep strain in your talks was very, very interesting and very fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Actually, I happen to know that they have an extra number. Would that be?
That's my fate.
Just wanted to, while Eero is preparing, just wanted to also say that the art offers, of course, the wonderful playground to understand what is fate and what is the embodiment of lots of quite abstract themes that we have discussed today. And Monterey gives very, very good examples of those embodiments. So if you don't find science in here, you might find your fate in arts.
This song tells about how sweet it is to be tormented by love. Let's try to see if you feel that.
La speme fallace rivolga il piede di letto le pace non siano a me ed empiato mi diedi ristoro di buona mercé tra l'ombra infinita tra speme e tradita vivrà la mia fede. Pentita e languente sospiri mio Dio.